Welcome back to another episode of Alternative Space History. I am your host, So Not the Hero Type, and we're going to dive right in with an Osiris 1 launch. The payload on this particular launch is the Return Capsule 2, which is essentially just a little avionics probe so we can control it, some SRBs, the Advanced Biological Sample, and the all-important heat shield. Now, in all technicality, the first contract, you only have to get up to 6,500 meters a second and then do the return after hitting space. But it's just a lot easier to go orbital real fast and then just do the retrograde burn and fall back down, like we're doing here. I'm also comboing these with these other advanced biological, they're technically sounding rocket contracts. So we had to add a little sounding payload to these particular units. But all in all, the tooling cost wasn't that much, and the amount of funds we get for doing those extra contracts makes it worth it. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, there are these contracts where basically they want you to use an advanced biological unit and send it a certain speed at a certain height and recover it. You can combo those with the orbital ones because you exceed the specs you have to do to hit the contract goals. It just makes it overall easier to stack them together. There's two of them, a 3,000 and a 4,000 meters a second, which is a lot easier to do once you can do orbital returns. Now, there were some hiccups in this particular mission, which we'll get to there here shortly, but our main goal was we wanted to try and go lunar. We do have some X-Plane contracts we're going to be also kicking out. So we're going to have Ziggy Kerman on his 6th career flight, attempting to hit 75,000 meters above the surface. Once we unlock the quote-unquote X-15 cockpit, we will be able to actually do Kerman line missions with these planes, which is the ultimate goal. I wanted to try to get those done this year, but unfortunately with the lunar stuff and the tech I had to kind of push ahead, we won't be able to achieve that until next year. And next year we're basically going to be focusing on gaining science from around the moon and trying to see if we can get a man past the Kerman line and officially into space, even if it's only for a few seconds. Now, as you see here, we took a pretty aggressive pitch on this, and it was mostly because I had a feeling I was going to slightly exceed that 75k mark, and this cockpit is only rated for 75 kilometers. So, as you see here, the little flashing thing, it means basically we are out of the cockpit pressurization level, and it's basically the Kerbal will suffocate if he's up here too long. So by taking the more aggressive pitch, you're only at your AP for a shorter amount of time, and you're able to pretty much go above what you need to go above, but still get back down soon enough to where your pilot doesn't die. The issue we're still having up here in the higher altitudes is control. We do have upgraded RCS thrusters. I did move them around a little bit, and I got it to work a little bit better, but we're still having a little bit of an issue. Ziggy Kerman reports that all systems are nominal. Even though he did breach the cockpit level, he's okay. He didn't pass out. He had to hold his breath for a little bit, but everything seemed fine. Which was perfect because we already had a second X-Plane ready to air launch to attempt to break Ziggy's brand new record and reach the 80-kilometer mark. I wanted to see how far I could push these planes with the current cockpit configuration. Why we wait for our R&D team to research the next generation rocket plane cockpits so we can actually do proper suborbital launches and returns. As you see here, we came down on the runway. Nothing super exciting happened. Everything performed exactly how we wanted to. We did land a little bit later on the strip than we were initially planning due to being a little too fast, but everything went perfect. Now, we are in the WH Turbo for this next flight, which Oliver Kerman is going to be flying on his 5th career flight. And I've noticed something about the WH Turbo. It definitely has some stability issues in higher altitudes. And I'm starting to think maybe the little extra weight in the back from those SRBs, even though they're empty, is causing it to sort of become unstable. Now, during this flight, everything went according to plan. We managed to hit the 80K mark, and then we ran into a little bit of an issue. While checking all of the systems, we got a radio message back from Mr. Oliver Kerman about a slight electronic stability issue, which seemed to kind of happen as soon as we got up to that 70-kilometer mark. All of a sudden, our stability system, or our RCS system, started to fail, and we weren't able to properly control the airplane. Unfortunately, these systems do not have a reboot system in them yet, and we did attempt to regain control with RCS, but unfortunately, it just didn't seem to want to work. So we shut down the system, hoping a later reboot would give us a little bit more control, or we hoped that maybe we would be able to regain control once we got back into the atmosphere. The good thing is we managed to get the contract complete and broke an altitude record of 80.75 kilometers. The bad part was at this point the plane was spinning out of control so bad, even though we got our RCS thrusters to reactivate, we didn't think we'd be able to regain control of the now stalled aircraft as it spun out of control, thus forcing Oliver to eject the cockpit and hopefully come back into the ocean safely. You could hear his heart beating because he was so nervous as he comes crating back down to the waters of Earth, checking all of his systems to make sure he's not going too fast and hoping he doesn't do any major damage to the cockpit as he impacts into the water. Luckily enough, Oliver Kerman survived the impact and he was brought home safely, more or less shaken up. We go back now to make some adjustments to the X05 rocket plane. One of our neighboring space agency, NASA Space Agency, recommended we try a tri-engine setup for our next iteration of the X05, giving it a little bit more power and requiring a little less work on the two individual engines. This of course meant we had to make a little bit more fuel, as well as make some other adjustments to the weight and the wings. After deciding that adding the extra fuel and the extra engine would be the best bet to go with the X05 before eventually jumping over to the X07 iteration of our rocket plane program, the R&D team got hard at work designing and prepping the latest X05 model for its first maiden flight. But back onto the launch pad, we have our fourth launch, or Osiris-1, doing another orbital return contract, as well as stacking that 4,000 meter a second biological return contract. The people that were involved in the Osiris project have already started moving on to the next project, the Osiris-2, which we will be getting into shortly. The goal with the Osiris-2 was to basically keep the same basic idea and same basic rocket we used for the Osiris series, but give it the ability to pick up a heavier payload as well as achieve new orbital heights for later contracts, especially with the satellite department. Now, because the Osiris rocket was purely designed for one purpose, and the only purpose was to actually get satellites into orbits, we will be making a new iteration of rockets for human spaceflight shortly. Unfortunately, our parachute did burn up during the re-entry, and the contract was not successful, as the biological sample came crashing in to the waters of Earth. Back to the VAB, we had our team working on the Osiris-2 rocket, which, as stated before, was pretty much going to be an upgraded variation of the Osiris 1. One of the biggest differences between the Osiris 1 and the Osiris 2 was the AJ-10 secondary stage you're adding on top of the main booster stage, as well as doing 4 side boosters for the LR79s while keeping the single center stage as the LR105. Because we have the bigger, more upgraded launch pad finally finished, or just about finished, we decided to get to work on getting this rocket put together, testing it in simulations, and seeing exactly what the payload capacity was of this rocket. This would be the launch vehicle we were going to use to attempt to shoot our first probe at the surface of the moon. We decided to start building the base stage of the rocket before the launch pad was ready. That way we could add the payload unit onto it later and still get the launch in by the end of the year. But now we're back to the launch pad with our second attempt at the orbital return contract the first Osiris launch failed at. We are reusing the same base Osiris 1 launch vehicle, as it is currently our best vehicle for the job. As before, the Osiris 1 was able to successfully get our payload into orbit, and yet again we had issues with the RCS system on board. Ground control tried to use a little bit of a cheesy trick using one of the functions of the RCS thrusters to stabilize the payload just enough before it re-entered the atmosphere to keep the main parts of it from exploding, more importantly, keeping the parachute alive. And then this happened. The game froze up, it brought me back to the KSC, the rocket was gone, and the contract was completed. I don't understand what happened, but unfortunately I had not saved since the beginning of this year, and I wasn't able to go back and try and refilm it. So now to our 6th launch, we have Ziggy Kerman once again behind the helm, flying the WH Turbo 2, attempting to hold the 605 to 805 meters a second supersonic speed for 3 minutes, which this plane was more than capable of. As of right now, at a quarter to half throttle, it's able to maintain flight for 3 minutes and 45 seconds. Using those SRB boosters, we were able to get up to speed in a matter of 12 seconds and hold it easily for over 3 minutes. The reason we elected Ziggy to fly this second flight was because Oliver is currently still going through his traumatic experience from his earlier flight, and we currently have Carnassa, our special guest, and J. Fox Kerman studying the new X-15 cockpit, getting ready to be the first pilots to test out our next variation of rocket planes. But as Ziggy coasts at a whopping speed of roughly 640 meters a second, he comes up to the 3-minute mark and is able to complete the 3-minute mark with a little bit of fuel left to spare. Ziggy was ordered to bring the plane home after the contract was completed, but the pilot unfortunately got a little stir crazy and decided he had his own plan in mind. He told Mission Control he was going to have a little bit of fun since he had the fuel to burn and he completed his contract, and he was pretty sure of himself that he'd be able to land the plane without a problem. We unfortunately haven't had very good luck with the WH Turbo model, so ground control was a little nervous about what Ziggy was planning on doing. And unfortunately, this happens. Ziggy tried to bank a little too hard, causing one of the wings to break free and cause him to spiral out of control after ripping one of the wings entirely off. Realizing there was no way for him to control the plane and bring it back home, he decided to eject the cockpit and fall safely down to the waters just outside the Space Center in the Gulf of Mexico. Ziggy was worried about when ground control sent over rescue ships to pick him up, as he knew he was probably in trouble for destroying their brand new plane. Luckily enough, he hit the water at a relatively low impact and was able to survive the crash. Meanwhile, R&D was working away at building the new Manny 1 lunar impactor probe, which would be launched on the Osiris II launch vehicle. The Manny probe was a real basic design, purely a probe that weighed enough to complete the contract, with some RCS control for fine-tune adjustments, no solar panels to reduce build time, enough battery power with hibernation to get there with time to spare, and of course loaded with scientific equipment to send data back to Earth. Now that we had the upgraded communications towers at Mission Control, as well as the new antennas, we were able to confidently stay in contact with our probe as it hopefully successfully reaches the lunar surface and impacts into pieces. Now, we knew with designing such a small probe we had to find some way to get it on a trajectory to the lunar surface, so we built a little injection stage simply known as the LI, also known as the Lunar Injection Stage. Very uncreative, but we were working on a time crunch. Now, unfortunately, when all that weird glitchy stuff happened, it cleared out all of the missions and contracts I had accepted, including my lunar ones. So I re-accepted them, I went into the cheat menu, I drained the funds that they gave me, and then I set a Kerbal alarm for when the contracts originally would have ended. That way, when that alarm goes off, if I have not successfully completed those 2 contracts, I will go into Mission Control, I'll go into the cheat menu, decline the contracts, and take the funding hit, which unfortunately we can't afford right now. So here's to hoping we manage to get something to the surface of the moon within the next 2 launches of the Osiris II with the Manny 1 probe. Now, during the construction of the Manny 1, we were able to, our R&D team was able to finalize the research on the X-15 cockpit. So we now have a new cockpit that we can use for suborbital returns, allowing our human pilots to pass the Kerman line and hopefully safely return. The X07 is going to be using a lot of similar features from the X05 series, but we decided to go with a more swept wing design, as well as a slightly wider wing-based design. We wanted to try to reduce the drag, but give it as much stability and control as we possibly could, as this plane will be achieving new speed and new height records, and hopefully returning safely. We made a few other changes to this design as well. Instead of using the multiple smaller tanks, we are going to be going with one large center tank. Another few things that we did adjust is we put some new RCS thrusters on the nose, hoping it would give us some more stability, as well as made some adjustments to the rear wings, as well as a few minor adjustments to the length of the body. The lengthening of the plane was more or less so we can give ourselves a little bit more fuel, as well as give the plane a longer profile. Liking the tests that the X05 experimental tri-engine setup, we decided to go with a similar setup for the X07, using those 3 engines as we prepare for its maiden flight. This is the base design of the X07. We did, however, have plans to create a 2nd generation version using the XLR99 variant engine, which is a high-powered spaceplane engine, which we are hoping to have researched and ready by the year 1958. But now, with having the prototype for the X07 finalized, we go back to the launch pad for the Manny 1 launch, our first attempt to see the surface of the moon.
I'm your host, Harold Kerman, and today we stand outside the New Horizons Space Center as we await official word about the first launch of the Manny one on top of an Osiris 2 launch vehicle. What we have heard so far is they are planning to launch a probe into the side of the lunar surface. This will be an impactor probe, and it will not be recovered, unfortunately. But what they hope to do is transmit data back to the Space Center so they can learn more about the lunar surface for future missions. Officially, as of now, they are planning to make the launch on the 8th of November in 1957. This will be the first steps to hopefully achieving a man on the moon. As of now, the moon is a mysterious object that we've only seen from Earth, and New Horizons Space Center has made it a goal to explore further. We have talked to some of the lead engineers, and we weren't really able to hear much from them as they're keeping a lot of this under wrap. But one thing that they did tell us was this.
Hi, yes, my name is Theodore Kerman, and I am one of the lead engineers. And the only thing I can tell you guys today about the launch, well, as the young kids are saying now, rocket goes,
And we had successful liftoff and successful booster separation. Now all we have to do is hope the LR-105 series can carry most of this payload into orbit so the AJ-10 can circularize and finalize its orbits. For some reason during the launch things got a little off kilter, which is why you see the AJ-10 stage kind of pointing at an oddball direction to finish its circularization. But fear not, everything was successful. Now all we had to do was plot our course to the lunar surface, make sure we are on an impact course, make our burn, and then go ahead and keep in contact with the probe until it hopefully hits the surface of the moon. We will be using an automated system for the very first launch to help guide our way to the lunar surface for the first time. Our men in R&D have been working vigorously to program this probe correctly so it wasn't a big waste of funding, and we were able to achieve our goals before the end of the contracts that we have received. As you see here, the AJ-10 stage ignited perfectly. Everything seems to be going according to plan, and all we have to do is hope to get our trajectory just right so we can impact the surface of the moon. We did, however, overshoot our target slightly. Luckily, the crew put extra RCS in the thrusters for the injection stage, so we were able to use it to make a slight adjustment to recorrect our course. Ground teams decided to go ahead and activate all scientific equipment as the probe would be going into upper Earth orbit, and we have yet to do any experiments that high above the surface. So along with getting scientific data from high above the surface of the Earth, we would also be collecting data from the lunar surface if all went according to plan. Even though the probe is very simplistic and very small, we did, however, put a few safeguards in place in case things went wrong. Because we did have no solar power ability on this probe, we had to time out the antenna extension as well as the battery life perfectly in order to make sure the probe still had power by the time it reached the lunar surface when it impacted. The main goal of this mission was to reach the moon for the first time and gain some scientific data, but also pave the way for further launches to impact and possibly orbit the moon in the years to come. From what we were able to see and the readings we were getting back at Mission Control, we had successfully made an impact course with the lunar surface, and all of a sudden we had lost all radio contact, which we assumed meant we had contacted the lunar surface and impact was achieved. After discussing with the boys back home, we had decided that we wanted to open up a second space center here in America called Vandenberg Air Force Base. The new center would be designed and used for primarily rocket planes, training new astronauts, and possibly a new hub for low Earth orbit satellites. That way, the main hub can focus on interplanetary and lunar contracts without feeling the need to use time and resources to do low Earth orbit contracts. One of the very first designs coming out of the Vandenberg Space Center is going to be the first camera strapped to the body of an airplane. But back over to our main New Horizons Space Center, we're just going through and making sure astronauts are nice and trained up. And at that point, that is the end of the episode. So I want to thank you guys again for stopping by. I hope you guys enjoyed. I did go with a new style this time, and I decided to have a little bit of fun with some cinematics. So I hope you enjoyed that as well. Either way, don't forget to check out the Discord. I'll leave a link in the description. Other than that, thank you guys again for stopping by. I hope I see you next year in the year 1958.